Good morning, good afternoon for those of you that are on the other side of the Atlantic, and maybe a good evening for some that are in far reaches of the globe. This is Millicent Pitts with Ocean Exchange, and we are really delighted to be part of the Marine Technology Society webcast series. Thank you very much. I talked to a board member of MTS yesterday to personally thank her for this opportunity. I do want to tell you a bit about Ocean Exchange, and then we're going to move quickly to our agenda. And I'm hoping that there are some of you that have never heard of us, so this is the opportunity. We are a nonprofit. We are US-based, but international in scope, and our only mission is to help advance the adoption of solutions very broadly in what people consider the field of sustainability. But we focus on healthy and resilient oceans and coastal systems, and we have some particular focus about sustainable ocean shipping because of one of our major sponsors. Speaking of sponsors, you'll see the major sponsors right there. You can go to oceanexchange.org and see our board and the rest of our sponsors, and we're very grateful to them. We could not do this without them. I want to remind everyone that this is being recorded, and we're going to stick to our time schedule, and we're going to be done by 11:45 Eastern. If there are some very, very detailed questions, we'll hold on after that if someone wants to talk to Lou or Deb about that. I also want to acknowledge Alice Spillman. You don't see her here, but she's part of the Ocean Exchange team, and she's going to drive the bus during this webcast. And we also couldn't do what we do without her either. So without any more introduction, I'm going to turn this over to Dane. I want to meet any of you that don't know Ocean Exchange. Please contact me. There'll be information on the last slide. We will start our 2021 process early in 2021, where we award non-dilutive funds, but more on that in an individual conversation. Dane Dunstan is our MC at our physical event, which will be in Fort Lauderdale in 2021, and he's been with us for several years. Dane, it's all yours. Alice, why don't you advance the slides?
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Millie. Well, it's very exciting to have everybody here, and thank you for being here. We've got a great crowd today. You know, at Ocean Exchange, we tend to get about 12 finalists in every year, and those can be anything from purifying drinking water in Kenya to shipping to batteries to all sorts of stuff. But something interesting happened in 2018. For some reason, we had an unusual number of applications focused on fisheries. And we made a joke at the time that if we just closed the door and locked everybody in for 2 days, we would have been able to solve most of the world's fishery problems. It was really that kind of a day. If you were on our August webcast, you saw Blue Ocean Gear, who handles the problem of ghost fishing and lost fishing equipment in the ocean. They were part of that year, and they were one of the winners. And also today we have Blue Nalu and Lou Cooperhouse, who was here at the time. And Lou had, and his team had just a phenomenal question to ask. They asked the most powerful question there is in life, which is why? Why do we have to overfish in the ocean? Why do we have problems with aquaculture? Why do we eat the fish that has mercury in it? Why do we have to do all these things? And why not a third way? Why can't we rethink our marine food supply? And if you think your marine food supply is pretty state of the art, I got news for you. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I went to our local market. I bought a great big beautiful slab of salmon that was already pre-wrapped. I got it home, unwrapped it, and wow, did that thing stink. It was, oh, and it was within the freshness date, but whatever happened to it? And I took it back, and the guy said, he says, you know, that happens a lot. He says, you just never know when the food comes in. We wrap it. It should have been fresh, but things happen. And in fact, the amount of fish that's brought out of the ocean during overfishing, and Lou's going to talk about this, a huge amount of it does not make it to anybody's table. It's lost and it's wasted. So what if there was a third way, a better way to do that? So what I want to do is talk about that third way. And I want to hand over to a very special person who's helping us today. Deb Mosca is a coach, mentor, entrepreneur who really helps a lot of people in this thing who are trying to come up with solutions, how to do it, how to get focused. So she's a real expert in this area of fisheries and a third way. So Deb, why don't you take it away?
Okay, well, let's go to the next slide. I think I have, that's just a little bit of background on myself. I did want to first start out by thanking Millie and Ocean Exchange and the Marine Technology Society for giving me the opportunity to be with you today, and especially to interact with Lou in this very exciting, disruptive technology, basically, for the seafood industry. If you go to the next slide. So this is just highlights of the seafood and really very, very high highlights of the seafood industry, according to the most recent report, 2020 report from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. And you see at the bottom, it says one of their sustainable development goals is to conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, and marine resources. And this is very near and dear to my heart. I set up a nonprofit organization about 8-9 years ago called the Marine Biotechnology Center of Innovation. And it was through that process, I was always involved in marine resources in terms of novel chemistries from the sea. But I became aware of so many more aspects of our marine resources that were being depleted or overused or destroyed. And I became involved in aquaculture and trying to stimulate that as a way to meet the growing demand for protein, in particular for our population, which was probably going to increase by 25% by the year 2050. And so as a result, I spent a great deal of time focusing on some of the industries within North Carolina and the United States and how the technology is involved in aquaculture. So here we just have the overview of seafood in general. The market is valued as of 2018 about $150 billion. So it's a sizable market. And a lot of that does come from aquaculture. When you consider algae, algae is farmed plants. So aquaculture is the farming of plants and animals. Aquaculture basically exceeds wild-caught fisheries in terms of the amount of millions of tons that are brought in. As far as the actual market value for each one, the actual price probably for aquaculture might be a little bit higher, but I don't have that broken down here. With respect to the industry as a whole, the trade has increased 21-fold since 1976 and provides currently, or at least of 2018, over 59 million jobs in the primary sector. And by that, I mean the actual harvest or production of the seafood, because when you get into the secondary sector, like Dane was saying, when it gets to the supermarket and gets packaged and it gets sold to the consumer, that's many, many more jobs. So it is a significant industry globally. What is of concern, as Dane touched on, is that the fish stocks that are being harvested today are below 66% are within the sustainable levels, and that's down from 90% in 1974. So we've, as you can see in the consumption, we've increased our consumption of seafood from about 9 kilograms in 1961 to over 20 kilograms per capita. And so with that increase in consumption and increase in harvest and depleting the resources, we're in a very, very downward spiral, and we need to do something to stop it. Currently, shrimp, salmon, and canned tuna are the top 3 species consumed globally. And what we're trying to do now, and you'll hear from Lou later on, is find a better way to provide seafood to the population that wants it. Next slide. This is a very simple graph to show you. As you can see in the orangey bottom, the wild harvest kind of plateaued in the late 80s or so. And that was replaced in terms of increased seafood production by aquaculture, which is the blue graph's top. And largely, a lot of that was inland waters, meaning it might have been ponds, or it might have been recirculating aquaculture, or it might have been rivers or streams, compared to marine waters, which is the lighter blue. So it shows you how wild caught, even though it has more or less plateaued, is still harming our oceans because we are still overfishing some of those stocks that are not at sustainable levels. Next slide. This is a further breakdown in terms of the fish and versus aquatic plants that are being produced by aquaculture. And if you look at the very light blue bars on the bottom, you can see that inland finfish aquaculture, think catfish or tilapia as an example, has increased much more so than finfish marine and coastal aquaculture. Similarly, the aquatic algae has become a tremendous source of food and protein sources, and that's the gold bars on the top. So not all aquaculture, not all species are created equal, and there are reasons for that. Some are more difficult to produce than others. Most people are familiar with tilapia. It's a very inexpensive fish, but a lot of people are not very happy about how it's produced, especially if it comes from the Asian markets. And currently, Asia dominates production of seafood by about 88–89% of all the seafood. The United States imports over 90% of its seafood. So you need to be careful about where it's coming from. Next slide. So this gets us into the topic for today. How do we meet the projected seafood demand as we go forward? And what we're going to hear about today in that little top turquoise triangle is between now and 2050, we need to have a new alternative method of creating seafood, of bringing seafood to the table. And without stealing any thunder from Lou, I will turn it back to Dane to introduce Lou to our audience and his disruptive technology for alternative seafood.
Thanks, Deb, and stay with us because we're going to come back with some questions. And let me just say about the questions. If any of you have any questions, you can enter them now into the area in the sideboard there that says questions. So start firing the questions off if you've got them. Try not to put them in the chat. Put them in the area that says questions, and then we'll be managing that as we go along. And it's not too early to start putting some questions up.
Diane,
over the years,
can I note that there is a one-page handout that you can see on the right navigational bar, and it's a one-page summary about Blue Nalu. If you registered before a certain cutoff time, you would have received this by email from the MTS. But if you registered later than that, it's available to you there. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. So, over the years of Ocean Exchange, I've been on stage with and coached and worked with so many finalists who were with phenomenal things. Lou Cooperhouse stands out in my mind as one of the most impressive, and I really remember him. And what I've noticed is the last few days as we've been preparing for this, every time I've been on another conference call or with a client or doing something and I mention what we're talking about, I can just see their ears perk up. They go, really? That would be phenomenal. We need that. Everybody just looks at it and says, this is the greatest idea ever. What if we could make seafood on our own that's healthier, better, and it just tastes great? So Lou, why don't you explain how you do that and tell us about Blue Nalu?
Well, thanks, Dane, for that tremendous introduction, and thanks, Deb, also for the information, and Millie and the Marine Technology Society and Ocean Exchange. Just really happy to present today. As Dane mentioned, I had the great pleasure to be a finalist in the Ocean Exchange competition. I believe it was in 2018. Our company was recently born, actually. We're excited to make it as a finalist, but we've come a long way since then. I'm excited to tell you more about that today. Next slide, please. What Blue Nalu is all about, from the get-go, as Deb and Dane and were describing, was providing the world with a third solution. That today, as you've heard, we have wild caught and farm raised, and how do we feed the planet in the decades to come? So our goal of Blue Nalu was really based on this challenge and this radical need to support the world, to supply the world with protein in the future. I was personally, just a brief background, I have a 35-year career in the food industry, but I really witnessed a total transformation for foods that are not just healthy for me, but are healthy for the planet. So this whole initiative is driven by consumer interest. And so our goal is to truly be the global leader in manufacturing these products made directly from fish cells, giving consumers the same great positive experience they have from seafood, driven by taste that we all love, but also healthy for people, humane for sea life, and sustainable for our planet. Again, making these seafood products directly from fish cells, again, with all the positive attributes of fish, but without the mercury, environmental contaminants, or other pollutants that might be associated with fish, particularly as our waters get more polluted in the future. And our whole model for really bringing our product to market is all about partnerships. We're eager to talk to some of the listeners today about how we can potentially partner. We see those partnerships really on the supply chain side, but also marketing, sales, and distribution, working in alignment with NGOs, working in line with the seafood industry to bring our products to consumers in the future. Next slide, please. So what am I talking about? So the cell-based seafood process is initially what's called in vitro. You know, we're making the seafood products outside of the body of the fish, not making a living fish like in humans, but making fish fillets. Just the cell types that are associated with the fish that we consume, those cell types being muscle cells, fat cells, or connective tissue cells. We're doing all of this without genetic engineering, which is a huge milestone that we've developed. Please realize there was no intellectual property. Nobody had ever propagated fish cells when this company started. We now feel pretty confident that we have more stable cell lines of seafood species in our offices here in San Diego than exists anywhere else in the world, with well over 100 stable cell lines from a wide variety of fish species. And what we're doing then is we're taking these stable cell lines, we're growing them in larger and larger volumes in what's called bioreactors with our own media formulation. So what that media is some of the same ingredients that are found in fish feed: amino acids, salt, sugars, vitamins, and other nutrients. And then we're producing edible fish tissue. We're literally extruding these cell types into a fillet or into a cube or whatever type of product application may be associated. And then the product has the same sensory attributes and nutritional characteristics as conventional seafood products. Next slide, please. And why this is so important, I think, as Dane and Deb were describing, consumers are increasingly concerned about the foods they consume, particularly seafood. But fundamentally, there's a greater challenge. It's about food security. It's about the vulnerability of our supply chain. And today, we're shipping seafood perhaps 10,000 miles from Southeast Asia to New York City. And along the way, there might be 30% bycatch, perhaps more. There's also the associated issues with habitat damage, with what that might occur from ocean floors being damaged, but also the issues around potential inhumane slaughter, labor practices associated with fishing, but of course the personal welfare issues that I've described as well, potential for pathogens, toxins, parasites, poisons, mercury, etc. The FDA and EPA, as we all know, have 3 suggestions for pregnant or nursing women to avoid certain species or have 1 or no more than 2 to 3 servings per week. What if we can make, back to Dane's question, why not? What if we can make seafood without mercury at all, where you can consume as much as you want? It would totally be a paradigm shift for those families who really love seafood but are restricted during that time of their life. So again, we're shipping the seafood maybe across the world, 10,000 miles with a 60% yield. With the Blue Nalu cell-based seafood process, it's 100% yield made locally. So we're totally disrupting the current model for how food is transported around the world with a tremendous environmental footprint, and replacing that with a new paradigm shift for local, in which we can manufacture seafood without the bycatch, without the yield loss, and actually make it with all these positives and at a supply chain that's close by. Next slide, please. What's really important at Blue Nalu is how we select the fish that we're working on. We're specifically targeting fin fish products that are overfished, primarily imported and difficult to farm raise. So not only are we accomplishing all these things that are providing a healthier product for humans, but we're also creating jobs and building factories. We're also reducing fishery pressure, displacing the need for imports. In the US, the FDA indicates that there's as much as 94% of our seafood is imported. Around the world, there's nations that are very focused on food security issues and providing more sustainable solutions to support their population in the decades to come. So we're focused on these issues, including species that are scarce, that have the highest food safety, environmental concerns, etc. Next slide, please. And specifically what we're doing is we're targeting these 4 commercial species initially. Again, we've been able to create cell-based seafood proof of concepts across a broad array of finfish that today include mahi-mahi, which many of our listeners know cannot be effectively farm raised, Pacific bluefin tuna. So consider the oxymoron of a sustainable year-round supply of mercury-free bluefin tuna. That's the oxymoron that we can provide for consumers in the years to come. We will be working on Chilean sea bass. We've also developed red snapper. Other species that you could see are listed there as well. There's certainly the potential for us to think about mollusks and crustaceans in the future. But right now, as a company, we're focusing specifically on finfish and those 4 particular species that are indicated there. And again, our whole model is to partner with food marketers across the world so that we could really understand what are the consumer attitudes on food service or retail, how we bring product to market and so forth. We don't profess to know all about the unique needs of consumers around the world. Our focus is on technology, operations, quality assurance, food safety, regulatory strategy, and we're really looking for partners to really help us bring our products to market across the world. Next slide, please. So actually last December, we actually did the first ever in the world demonstration that this could be done. So this particular product was our demonstration that we did this for an investor event where we provided a cell-based seafood product in a variety of food service applications. So if you think about seafood, how do we actually prepare it? If you get philosophical about it, there's really 3 ways. We heat it. What does heat mean? We might sear it, grill it, saute it, pan fry it, deep fry it, microwave it even, just a variety of preparations in different temperatures that are all a bit, aggressive and perhaps abusive to the makeup and the texture of the product. We also might acidify it. We're making a poke, ceviche, kimchi, also a low pH solution that also can potentially degrade product. We also might prepare it raw. So that's what we did. We prepared it in all cooking applications that we were able to demonstrate that our product, you can see in the pictures here on the left-hand side, was essentially a whole muscle product, the same integrity, the same taste, mouthfeel as conventional seafood products. And again, we realized that we are on the pathway for commercial success. Next slide, please. So where we're at in our own commercialization timeline is we have these 5 phases we've identified of commercial validation, if you will. They're all preceded by what we call phase 0. And I kind of came up with this when the company got started, is really how does this company do rapid commercialization? What might it look like? So it's a stage gate tiered approach. So phase 0 is this precursor stage that's really all about propagating the fish cell lines as I described. It's a perpetual process as we do species after species and gain knowledge, reduce our product costs and so forth. And then we increasingly take this to larger volumes, 10 liter, 200 liter, 2000 liter, and so forth, as you can see. Where we're at right now is kind of in the bold middle print on the left-hand side. We are introducing phase 3 next year. That means we will be in a test market with product in commerce in a small scale way, in a 2,000 liter capacity, produced from our San Diego operation, from a 40,000 square foot facility that we're currently renovating, that we will have in the market to actually introduce. We may in fact be the first company in the United States, perhaps in the world even, to introduce products into commerce. Again, very limited way. Our goal is not to really demonstrate, large scale profitability, but just to demonstrate proof of concept and get some market feedback. But that phase 3 success, as you can see, leads to phase 4 and phase 5. Phase 4 being, really demonstrating automation, and phase 5 being large-scale manufacturing, which allows us, we believe, to produce 10 million pounds of product per year from a single factory. We actually are modeling that first factory being dedicated to bluefin tuna, for the food service market, Pacific bluefin tuna, that is, that we think would be quite a paradigm shift for the marketplace, and something we could demonstrate, profitability right off the bat. Next slide, please. So Blue Nalu, we're very focused on number 14, life below water, but we're also quite aligned with 10 UN SDGs in total. As you can see, what we're doing here is providing I'll pick on a few. Better wages, and number 8, really an opportunity to build factories in sustainable cities, number 11, and obviously focusing on many of the other aspects listed there, but also clearly important to us is number 17, is how we can partner with industry and bringing our product to market, how we can partner with NGOs and others aligned with our mission to really make for a third leg on our global supply chain for seafood. Next slide, please. And again, just wanted to conclude with my personal contact information and also our website, and happy to take Q&A and back to Dane and Deb, and thanks so much for your attention today.
Thanks, Lou. And we've got some great questions lined up. Deb, you jump in first, though, if you have a question to start with, and then I have a question.
Well, I would like to ask one question first, and that is, tissue culture, as has been described for the last 50 years or so, especially mammalian tissue culture, which I've done quite a bit of work in, usually requires addition of supplements in order to get the cells to grow, such as fetal bovine serum. And we all know that that's an issue. I think the only source allowed is now New Zealand because of mad cow disease, just about everywhere else. What about, and without giving away anything that's secret sauce, are you able to use fetal bovine serum, or have you found a way around that?
We have found a way around that, Deb, and you're absolutely right. Fetal bovine serum, just in the name of it, is something that obviously doesn't belong in a food product, in our opinion, and obviously is coming from an aborted calf, and obviously, we're obviously developing fish cells. It's obviously, Charles Darwin would be pretty scratching his head if he thought this even made sense. But nonetheless, we have been able to replace this with the plant-derived, GRAS-approved ingredients. This whole industry, not just Nalu, but all of our peers, recognize this as a non-starter. And I think most of the companies in the space, there's actually maybe four or 5 dozen companies around the world that are either in a startup phase or farther along as we are in developing products. And I think there's a global commitment to eliminate FBS across the board. We're all finding different solutions, but we're also seeing, Deb, just an awful lot of startups working on these growth factors and other supplements that are required to enable these cells to continue propagating and result ultimately in a stable cell line. So there's a lot of new solutions that are coming, and we're excited to see this coming out of use for this whole application.
Great.
Hey, Lou, that answered one of the questions that Michael McHarg had asked about nutrients. Another question from John Derrick: would it be possible to affordably produce fish fillets with greatly enhanced levels of omega-3 fatty acids?
Great question, Dane. And it's one of the things that we asked also is everybody loves seafood for its positive nutrients, particularly the omegas. When we're working with the FDA, we actually presented that same situation. Back to your question, Dane, before, what if and why not? So our first objective is to meet the standards of conventional fish products, no more, no less than all the nutritional attributes that are common to, for example, mahi-mahi. And we're literally doing analytics of conventional mahi-mahi. Currently in the United States is imported from Peru, Ecuador, and Taiwan, I think representing north of 80% of all imports in this country, and something like 94% of mahi is imported, or maybe even higher than that in the US. But nonetheless, we're looking at the nutritional composition of those conventional products and ensuring that our products meet those. But you're absolutely right, Dane. The future could hold that we could have a product that would be fortified, and the labeling would need to indicate that as well, with perhaps not just greater omegas, but higher levels of other ingredients that might be of relevance to consumers. But we're starting off with the baseline of same as, not better than.
Lou, let me ask a question about the production timeline. How long does it take to produce a fillet of mahi-mahi? And secondly, when we talked in 2018, I remember you and me talking about 3D printing. Are you able to talk a little bit about the process of how you actually build it up with the 3 different kinds of cells?
A little bit, Dane. So I think the no, and I think to answer your first question, there's really two answers to how long it takes. You know, one answer is first we're establishing a stable cell line, and that requires you know, well north of 50 doublings. And we've actually had cells that have doubled as many as 200 times. You know, there's a scientific limit called the Hayflick limit that you want to exceed. That's you know, the magic number is 50. That really gives you confidence you have a stable cell line. So that process can take about a year. So basically, there's a year of what we're doing is we're creating. It's like a starter culture for making bread. So we're making that raw material, which takes us about a year. But then when it's time for production, it's a matter of weeks. You know, even as little as 2. So we're literally able to, if you will, Dane, turn on a switch. You know, say around the world, there's a species that all of a sudden was on a watch list, or you know, became totally unavailable relatively quickly. We can actually turn off our factory from species 1 and turn on species 2. So we can literally manufacture products because we have those cell lines in inventory, if you will, on relatively speaking, on demand basis. So it's a total paradigm shift from a supply chain point of view. And your second question was about, you know, form. We are exploring various methods of extrusion. 3D printing is a concept of extrusion. It's just typically associated with you know, very high resolution requirements for printing. Well, you know, obviously food doesn't require that kind of resolution. So whether it's 3D printing or extrusion or layering, these principles are very common in the food industry. So if you think about the foods we're consuming, they might be a bit more homogeneous in texture, you know, like a poke cube might be, or they might be layered.
Yep.
So unlike red meat, which is marbled and very complex structure, fish is typically a repeating structure. It flakes with a fork. So what that means is you could, you know, conceptually do muscle fat in a repeated way in layers, as if it were lasagna or even puff pastry. You know, so there's different kind of principles that the food industry uses all the time that have applications in this sector. So when I first talked about this, I said, wow, it's a little bit like puff pastry. I made my share of puff pastry in my day too. So it's so some of these same principles could work, but also 3D printing may be a process we'll consider too. But right now, it's more about extrusion.
Okay. Yasim Shirelli has a question about the projected cost.
Yeah, one thing that's cost is obviously something that the industry, you know, has been very keen on. So as Deb certainly knows, the cost of this process historically has been crazy expensive. It's been used obviously for pharma grade. So you know, one reason that Blue Nalu, frankly, in our more recent financing, we were able to bring in strategic investments from 2 of the companies I'll mention. I'll mention all 5 real briefly, but 2 of them were Nutreco and Griffith Foods. Nutreco being one of the largest suppliers of aquaculture feed in the world, and Griffith obviously in the food science ingredient business, but also Sumitomo, Pomoan, and Rich Products were also participated as an investor. But you think about the supply chain side, we are not a pharma grade solution. We are feeding humans with a food grade product. So the industry, I think, had some misperceptions about cost initially because, you know, the world only knows pharma grade and had never experienced economies of scale before. So what we're talking about is introducing food grade raw materials and economies of scale for the first time. We think the cost will come down dramatically once we get to scale. There have been a number of projections done by organizations like GFI, the Good Food Institute, that have indicated that the cost of this media can increasingly get reduced quite significantly. To answer your question, we think that we can be at price parity with conventional fish in a relative. We can clearly be at price parity with bluefin tuna immediately. We can be at price parity with fish that command a lower premium in value, we think, by factory 2 or 3 as we get to more economies of scale. So we do think this can be quite attractive from a cost perspective and a profitability perspective.
All right. Lou, question from Deborah Kosak. She's surprised to hear that salmon's not on your priority fish list. Is it not as popular, or are there more challenges with salmon? Why not?
It's absolutely popular. And the reason we're doing it is what I indicated in my species selection strategy slide. We're really targeting species that are overfished, that are typically imported. The salmon is done very well here in the United States. Yes, salmon is a very popular fish, but so are many. There's, as the adage go, there's so many fish in the ocean. So we're literally picking species where we can create jobs and build factories, not compete with industry, but instead partner and supplement the supply chain and displace imports. So we want to really work together with industry and really be very aligned with providing consumers with new choices. In some countries, salmon may be logical where the product is not grown in aquaculture or in the wild. So in other nations around the world, it might make sense. For the United States, it doesn't make sense for us at this time.
So we've gotten a couple of very interesting economic questions. Nam Nguyen wants to know, obviously this is a very high-tech product, but the thing about fisheries is, you know, the poorest villages in the world, if they're placed in the right place, can have a fishery going on there at a very small scale. And Deborah Johnson, sort of on the same thing, in terms of, is the product going to be affordable to the bottom billion? In other words, is this a way to feed the world's poor, and will it be a job creator?
That's absolutely our objective, Dane, is you know, kind of back to the UN SDGs and about decent work and sustainable communities. We see this this is totally about food security, and it's totally about, you know, democratizing seafood, you know, to support, you know, the billions. So, you know, arguably bluefin tuna could be available to the masses, not just to those that can afford it. And similarly, you know, other species can be available, you know, that are well loved by communities around the world. We of course need to get to this economies of scale, but clearly, Dane, we see this as an absolute solution for underdeveloped countries, and creating jobs. You know, back to the line with 10 of the SDGs. That's absolutely our focus long term, is to really democratize this in nations around the world, not just for those that can afford it.
So Lou, here's a question. Last month we were talking about energy storage and the fact that it's great to have a electric car that you know runs on electric power, and you're not, it's great, but the carbon footprint of all those batteries in your electric car is pretty huge. What's the carbon footprint, if you will, of production of blue Nalu fish compared to the fishing industry as a whole?
It's a great question, Dane, and that's something that we're keen to learn as well. And we welcome insight from some of the listeners today about how that we can develop that. We certainly realize, Dane, that it depends, right? It depends what species we're talking about. First of all, you know, what's the footprint of mahi look like versus bluefin tuna? You know, so there's a number of attributes and variables to be considered. So I look at it only this way: is, as I mentioned, right now we're, you know, let's pretend we're in New York City, you know, and we're receiving fish from 10,000 miles away from Southeast Asia. Again, with the cost of oil and the labor and the shipment for those long distances, the loss of bycatch and the potential other losses that occur along the way, associated with 60% yield is a weighted average versus 100% yield. So just intuitively, it's an extraordinary environmental benefit, unlike any other cell-based protein product, which has a strong local component. You know, we have a yield issue and a considerable transportation issue that is now being displaced. Yes, we're using water and energy, a bit like the beverage industry does, but clearly, you know, intuitively, it's a significant environmental footprint benefit. But again, we need to do that work. You know, we need to better understand the basis, if you will, and what conventional products are. But we have not done that, you know, that LCA and other kind of work just yet. But that's something that we definitely want to do as we get more information in the future.
Deb, how do you see the carbon footprint here? What's the effect of this kind of technology?
Well, I think Lou outlined it very clearly. We actually looked into, when I was doing with the NBCOI, we actually looked into aquaculture and transportation costs between for example, North Carolina to the Northeast, where there was a shortage for black sea bass. And we have a faculty member who had conquered black sea bass aquaculture. And yet it wasn't sold locally because the wild catch locally was much cheaper. And so it's got to be better than shipping it, 800 miles away, and the gas and the energy and everything else. So we actually did a mini calculation, and it would be better to sell it locally, all the way around. So I can only imagine with what Lou's outlined, especially the import from Asia and South America, the damage to our environment, CO2 emissions, energy usage, the whole thing, and refrigeration. I mean, there's just so much that goes into import export.
Yeah. We've got some interesting questions on waste. Jane Cohen asks, are there waste products, and if so, are they commercially usable? And then Michael McHarg clarifies something he had asked earlier, trying to determine from Blue Nalu if it might align with the circular economy. In other words, taking advantages of biomass waste from other industries that could be used here and used in the development here. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, Dane. I think those are things we thought about for sure. And right now, as I mentioned in my presentation, I described very briefly that phase 5, that large-scale commercial factory, and we will be doing that, that development over the next 2 years. That whole design, based on the success of our phase 3 launch, our test market launch this coming year. But you're right, what is there an opportunity for recycling media? Is there an opportunity to use the waste from our process? We've even had a discussion, can we be co-located with vertical farming even, and utilize some of the waste from a vertical farm operation as feed, and the waste from our operation for that circular economy back to supply the feed on the nutrients for vertical farming. So we've had no shortage of kind of philosophical discussions around the topic. You're absolutely right. There's significant opportunities to look at this being quite a model for sustainability and being co-located with other operations that could even demonstrate some of these circular economy benefits. But it's still too early for us to have that fully developed.
Okay, we've got more questions than we can possibly get to, and so we can stay on after the end. If some of you didn't get your questions asked, we'll try to get to as many as we can. But let me end with one last question from the board, and it's an interesting one. Some vaccines are dependent on sharks. So given the scale of vaccines that we currently need and may need in the future, is there any transfer of technologies here that would take the stress off the shark populations?
We had not thought about that, Dane, but you're absolutely right. There are a number of niche sectors that are hardly niche that are quite sizable. That things that we could be considering for sure. We've also talked about the opportunity for cell-based seafood products to be used in the pet care industry, but we've also recognized that skin is also being used, for restorative surgeries on certain patients for burns. So could we get in the fish skin business? So arguably, we could also be making skin or other parts of the body as well. So all those things are possible for sure, Dane.
All right, great. Well, thank you everybody for your questions, and Deborah, thank you so much. Millie, back to you.
Great, thank you. So you all get a little sense of what Ocean Exchange is about. This is one of our finalists from 2018. Thank you, Lou and Deb. And I want to thank Dane. Dane is a MC at the highest level. He's fabulous, and we're so thankful that you're around. When he's not doing this pro bono work for us, he actually has a consultancy about leadership, and you can see his information there. Next slide. There we go. We actually have 2 webcasts in November. We have one in November, on November 4th, and it's with 2 university innovators. And I mentioned that Ocean Exchange gives away some awards. We have 2 $100,000 non-dilutive awards, that is free money for startups, like Lou competed for. We also have a $10,000 collegiate award that we've had for 5 years. And so we like that special emphasis on university innovators. And we're going to have 2 faculty members, one from Valdosta State and one from Florida Atlantic. And they're working in materials from the sea, and it's very, very interesting. So watch for that information on our website, oceanexchange.org. If you don't get our newsletter, you can sign up there. So this is a little bit of a commercial for Ocean Exchange, but you'll get all this important information and the dates. Next slide. And here we go. Give us your feedback. You see my email address there. You can, there's also a contact form on the website. We welcome ideas for future webcasts. We welcome any sort of feedback you have about the webcast itself. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Dane, and you can do some more questions for anyone who wants to hang on.
Perfect. Well, thanks for everybody who has to leave now. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on November 4th. And for those of you who want to stay, I'm just going to go through questions that we haven't gotten to yet in the order they were asked. This one from Yasim Sarali. Very interesting in knowing, are there another company in the US or overseas that has the same tech to produce seafood? And have you identified target markets in the US and worldwide?
Yeah, Dan, as I mentioned earlier, there's roughly 60 companies around the world in some way, shape, or form in this cellular agriculture or aquaculture sector doing meat, poultry, pork, or seafood. In some are working on, subsets of that, like foie gras or swim bladders. We're all very different in our approaches. We are very unique in the world in our platform technology across a broad array of high-value finfish species. There are some companies working on cell-based seafood that's more in the ground and form state, whether it be a shrimp ball or a fish cake. So our focus is the higher value whole muscle equivalent product that would be equivalent to the fillet. So there really isn't anybody else that's doing just what we're doing in our space, but there are probably I think 5 companies between they're either in Asia or US that are doing some variant of what we're doing, but maybe there is one company working on salmon, one working on shrimp, for example, in different sectors. But again, more in a defined method. Back to the market strategy, we're clearly launching in the United States in food service. Food service is really all that our volume will support for initially, and it'll be very fragmented. Obviously, retail will come later when we have the scale really fully fleshed out. We are focused on Asia in the long term, quite significantly. The per capita consumption of seafood is roughly 4x or 5x what it is in the United States, expected to increase dramatically in the years to come as GDP increases, and particularly, which is why we do have some investors from Asia already. So where we're launching the US, we think Asia is next market, but EU and Latin America are also large markets. So we are planting seeds, if you will, in these continents around the world.
So here's a question. As anybody who's a fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation knows, Captain Picard could reproduce anything in the holodeck except for good red wine. Can you take that on?
No.
We have a question from Jacob Paco. I think the answer to this is obviously yes, but can this be done on freshwater species?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've already accomplished it with both freshwater and saltwater species, so not an issue.
And from Yasim Sareli, any health or other risks related to the production or consumption of these products?
Yeah, there cannot be, Dane. That's why we're working very closely with the FDA to demonstrate, through a very transparent process that there are no risks. We're providing them the full documentation that they need for the food safety review, and it's been a really collaborative process with the FDA. We believe we're quite unique in how we're, I'm not sure other companies even talk with the FDA, certainly as we are, to really, very early on, we said, we want to be very transparent. We want to make sure we understand what the challenges might be, so there are no safety concerns. And the fact that we aren't using genetic engineering is also became a bit of a benefit for us more than we thought, not just from an early consumer adoption point of view, but even from an FDA point of view. It just made our process, still complicated, but just a different bar of expectations on their side.
Okay. My buddy Michael Fott has an interesting question. It's more of a business question. What would a existing company, operating company, look like that could jointly acquire through which to accelerate and de-risk the commercialization of your technology? In other words, would there be somebody that it might make sense for you to partner with?
Yeah, clearly our goal we're actively seeking such partnerships that can, again, we see, Blue Nalu has the factory, controls the IP, the technology, the operations, the quality assurance, the regulatory affairs, but the trucks that are on our dock are not Blue Nalu trucks. We're seeking to partner with organizations that already have, brand equity, distribution infrastructure to take products to market, whether they be in the prepared food segment or the seafood category, more specifically. And there's obviously food service, retail, and direct to consumer. So there's lots of channels, lots of geographies, lots of ways products are consumed. So we profess to be experts in the technology. We don't want to have that expertise in market distribution. So yeah, that would be the optimal partner, is somebody that could really help bring our product to the market, help us better understand the consumer and what specific species and market channels make the most sense, because we realize that across the world it's a very fragmented sector, more so than I first thought, and nation by nation, market by market, and even in certain nations there's multiple submarkets that are a lot to learn. So we're looking to partners to really help educate us, to bring the right product to the right customer at the right time.
All right, let's do it together. Here's a question from Vincent today. He wants to know, is in the culture fish product, is it as temperature sensitive as fish is? In other words, the cold chain. Does its volatile nitrogen content evolve in the same way?
Yeah, I mean, maybe two responses to that question. We've actually found that the fish cells require the same temperatures of incubation as they do in nature. So if the fish swims at 15 C or 20 C, we're actually incubating at a similar temperature. We are replicating nature and how the fish cells are growing, and it is going through some of the same growth responses, the same oxygenation requirements, and other factors are things that are all being considered in how the product is formulated. And then once a product is developed, I'm sure this was the question asked also, the product is, as a fish fillet, it's made in a closed system, so it has essentially no bacterial counts when it's finished, unlike conventional seafood, which might have cross-contamination from fish skin. So we feel our product will have a longer shelf life in the raw state. Obviously, once cooked or once frozen and thawed, it's pretty similar to conventional products. So that's sort of a different answer to the question as well. But it does have some advantages from a shelf life perspective on the distribution side too.
I've got a question from Yasim Shirelli. And by the way, Deb, jump in on any of these if you want. He wants to know, are you able to share, do you have any public or private investors helping you develop this tech, and who are they? And I'm sure you're not going to say.
All the tech is being developed internally. We are using relationships with organizations like Nutreco and Griffith Foods to help us more supply ingredients, but all the tech is internally developed. All the IP is homegrown. Nothing has been licensed from others.
With respect to the IP, typically, one of the things is filing a patent or keeping it as a trade secret. So have you developed your IP strategy to go one way or the other, or a combination of both?
A great question, Deb. It is a little bit of both, but it's heavily weighted towards trade secrets. We've actually documented north of 60 unique trade secrets that we've identified, from cell isolation methods and propagation, media composition, other aspects associated with processing, and there'll be a lot more to come. And there will be a few patents that we'll be providing that makes sense. But this industry, will really be trade secret driven because it's never been done before, and we realize that, as you know, with patents, it's not too difficult to learn 90%, from a patent, and it's not too difficult to challenge the last 10%. Mm-hmm. But why give away the first 90% when it's not necessary? And the Coca-Cola formulation is a great example of that. Trade secrets can work quite well in the food sector, and that's something that's a whole lot simpler. No disrespect to Coca-Cola, than what we're doing with cell-based seafood.
But we've only got time for a couple more questions because we're going to end at the top of the hour. This from David Tarnas. What have been the issues you had to address in food safety regulatory approval process from the FDA?
Yeah, the issues, there haven't been issues really, Dane, because we've been very transparent from day one, and therefore, we do recognize that others in this sector may experience some food safety challenges because this has never been done before. There's different ways of doing this. We asked ourselves early on, let's identify every possible pathway to manufacture a product, and we actually identified 6 macro ways of doing this. One of which in particular made a lot of sense to us because it did not involve genetic engineering. The other ones did. And we went down the pathway of what we considered the least resistance from a regulatory perspective and the greatest adoption, and it was the same approach. It was not using genetic engineering. That being said, others may run into challenges because we are all doing things differently. And frankly, the FDA asked, please come, in their words, early and often. We heeded their advice and we were there. Not everybody's doing that, and they may run into some roadblocks because they may be developing, processes that aren't using GRAS ingredients or other issues that they may need to start over in some respects. So the fact that we have been, with them on an iterative process has been very helpful to us to make sure that, that we're, mitigating or eliminating any potential challenges we may have otherwise.
All right. Wayne Becker has an interesting question. What does Nalu mean?
Well, that's a great question. Nalu is actually so Blue Nalu is actually founded in the state of Hawaii, and I was actually given a presentation on disruptive food technologies for the Hawaii Agricultural Foundation back in 2017, and I was talking about all these opportunities, and I was totally focused on, since Hawaii is in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and where many of our fish come from, and 2,500 miles from any landmass. So Nalu is a Hawaiian word for wave. It's a wave of the moana. Many people know what the word moana means. So Nalu is also street slang in Hawaiian. If you say Nalu it means go with the flow, but be mindful at the same time. So it's about being conscious. So we found it to be a perfect word. It's the wave of the ocean, and it's also about being thoughtful and conscious in what you do and your actions. So you can all say Nalu it as we head off today.
I love that. Well, I can't think of a better way to end than on that. Thank you, everybody. I just want to point out that we ended up with, I said earlier that people get fascinated with the subject. We ended up with 2/3 of our audience staying on for the extra questions. So that's pretty cool. Thank you to all of you. And those, if I didn't get to your questions, I apologize. And you can send an email to Lou and bug him with your questions. He'd love to answer.
Thanks,
Millie.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.